those dementia residents where I worked at the dementia facility who had good cognitive ability would say, you've got to keep your train of thought going. It's a big thing, keeping your thoughts going. And I found that those handful of people that came into the unit that did have good cognitive ability, that were doing crosswords regularly, reading the newspaper, doing quizzes, maybe 5 people out of 30 at a time, when they came in competently like this, you may think that their ability would decline in time, especially surrounded by other people that didn't have the same functioning. But actually, I found the opposite. I found that as long as they had the resources, as long as they had the quizzes, the crosswords and the newspaper, they kept up the effort and the ability and the cognition as a result of this long life-term practice of crosswords, reading the newspaper and doing quizzes. Those that had crosswords and that were interested in doing crosswords, they tended to come in with a pile of crosswords, probably easy to carry, in their suitcase, and lasted them for quite a while. And often a kind, interested, thinking relative would bring in a big pile of crosswords or magazines for them to continue to do them. So crosswords weren't really in short supply, but newspapers certainly were, because somehow it was different with the newspaper, because it meant that the person had to have a subscription. That's money, time, energy, effort, requires a nurse or staff member to go and get it from the front desk and bring it to the nursing station, label it, title it and give it to the resident. That actually does happen, that functioning, as long as the subscription's in place. But for some reason, relatives would bring in crosswords, but they wouldn't really, anyway, sometimes really they did give subscriptions of newspaper to dementia residents, maybe 1 or 2 out of 30, but certainly 5 or 6 out of 30 would have, maybe 8 would have really appreciated it. But anyway, nevertheless, those residents that were bright, that would have liked the newspaper but didn't get it, were remarkably resourceful at finding any old magazine that was about the newspaper, the one and only newspaper supplied to the unit. They'd thrash that, or they just got used to reading this newspaper from the day before, or, you know, last week. Whatever was about, they'd get and really go into the depth and detail of reading it, because they didn't have a vast range of material, or very little material available to them. Whatever they had, whether one woman's magazine or a couple of pages of the newspaper, they'd glean through it with great detail. And because of that, because of going into the depth and detail of that, they actually garnered a lot of information, which they'd come up with at the activities that, you know, that you'd miss just with a skim through. So they did remarkably well. Now, in terms of keeping the thoughts going and having the ability and interest to do that, everyone's capability is so different. Like, there was one man and woman that were at the unit. Both were bright, both were intelligent, they'd had big careers in their day. But the man, Alzheimer's, she had Alzheimer's too. The man continued to be social, gregarious, outgoing. He was a thinker and he did well. She completely withdrew. She didn't extend herself to other people, and she sort of became very depressed, and the symptoms of dementia just took over really quickly with her, because she wasn't making that cognitive effort to combat it, to come out of it, to socialise, to communicate. She just really gave up, I think. Mind you, she was pretty sharp with him, I have to say, because both of them were in the unit. And on this one particular occasion, he used to dismiss her a bit too. I think that was the thing. He didn't give her the credit that she was due. And of course, that made her shut down more, and she was sarcastic with him at times and created a fractured relationship. But when this is the problem, he was encouraging of other women, but he wasn't of her, because one example of this was that there were a few spare magazines, at the unit, one of the relatives had kindly come in with a bit of a pile. So I'd asked one of the former school teacher residents to hand them around, librarian style, to those that would like to read. So this woman resident came around with the magazines and asked this man's wife if he'd like a copy. And he said, oh, no, she doesn't read. And then so she thought, I'll just go over that, and said to her, well, would you like a magazine? And the lady said, yes, I would. And she sat down and she started to flick through it. And the man said, oh, well, she can just flick through it then. So because she was being dismissive of him, he was being dismissive of her, it was quite sad really, because they were both bright people, but she deteriorated faster than him. He continued to socialise with the other woman, which didn't really seem to bother her too much. Apparently he'd been gregarious like that all of her life. But I think it was the dismissiveness, that's the thing that really got to her. And so that was the thing. Most of the time this didn't happen at the dementia unit, not at all. Mostly dementia residents were very good at respecting each other, their abilities or inabilities, and especially if the person made the effort, then that was always apparent. Dementia residents were very good at being able to intuit whether someone was making an effort or not. And if they were, they'd certainly encourage and support. If not, well, they'd leave them to their own devices. And so that's how people became isolated. But even if people couldn't speak, that was fine. They would, find ways of communicating with them, supporting them, including them in the group, trying to understand what it was they were saying. And in that way, if the person, there was one particular resident who was aphasic, she couldn't speak, but she was really vigorous with her gestures and facial expressions and sort of sign language, sort of up the ante, sort of, so to speak. Then she had come to the workshops, understood the lot, and when she agreed with something, certainly you knew about it. If she didn't agree, you knew about that as well. And if you didn't understand what she was saying, you'd have to go through this great big list of, is it this, is it that, until you finally got it. And then only then would she settle. So she certainly found her way of being made, known, and was, she was a good contributor in that way to the group. She was a former nurse, and she was very much for justice for those people that were disabled, unwell, the people that used to fall a lot. She was always helping, calling out for nursing staff if someone needed help, if they'd fallen, needed a glass of water, or if they looked sick. She would always support them. So she was, everyone supports in their own way, don't they? Really, in these communities. It's incredible how they manage. So I've written about this at length, Residents' Voice, Residents' Rise, both from a dementia unit, both on Amazon and in my website description below. So please pass on the links. Thank you for all your subscriptions and support and surge of interest. It's so appreciated here. Thank you.